Hello, welcome to Miss Peepers Reading Corner. I'm Katrina, aka Miss Peepers. Let's talk about books. Today we're going to talk about Holly by Stephen King. Now, as you may know, Holly is the fourth novel, I believe, in a series of books that Stephen King has written that include as a primary character a woman named Holly Gibney. Holly first appears as a character in Mr. Mercedes, and Stephen King has said that he never really meant for her to be more than just a side character in this book, but the more he wrote about her and the more that he thought up stories, the more she kept coming back to him as a character that he wanted to write about more. So he followed that up with Finders Keepers. Now, I've read Mr. Mercedes. I have not read Finders Keepers. I'm reading this series way out of order, even though I have them all. In Finders Keepers, Holly is a fairly significant character, and then she appears in The Outsider and doesn't actually enter this book until pretty far in, where she's brought in by some of the main characters to help investigate something because she has a particular skill set. And then in Holly, she is not only the title character, but is also the primary character. I say all this to give a little bit of context to this book, which I think you can read as a standalone novel. There is enough of the callback to things that happened in previous books if you need information or to explain why Holly is the way she is or why she reacts to certain things the way she does. And this is, without a doubt, a detective novel, but it's also a horror novel. So it's a genre blend. Holly is a private investigator. She runs an organization called Finders Keepers, which was established in the second book, and she is hired by a mother to find this woman's daughter who's gone missing. As Holly investigates, she realizes that there's not just one missing person, but multiple that are not obviously connected, but keep coming up in her investigations. And it is a detective story, so it isn't probably a surprise that she eventually finds out who is responsible for these kidnappings. Holly is also an interesting book in that it is set in 2021 in the United States. And so it's got this backdrop of the second year of COVID. Stephen King, throughout the pandemic, was very vocal on social media in favor of vaccines, in favor of masking, in favor of following the scientific process and trusting medical professionals to help people navigate this illness. And I'm sure we all recall so much controversy that still continues 3 years later. It's not gone. It's lessened a bit in some places, but it's not gone. And the way that this shows up is that first, in the very beginning of the book, Holly is attending her mother's funeral, which is taking place over Zoom because of the pandemic. And her mother died in the hospital of COVID after refusing to get the vaccine. And Holly's relationship with her mother from the very first book, Mr. Mercedes, is not a smooth and friendly one. They have a lot of conflict. Holly's mother is abusive and holds her back. Holly also, for reference, is neurodivergent. The book doesn't give her a specific diagnosis, but it is very clear that she is meant to be somewhere on the autism spectrum. And she also has some amount of OCD, germophobia, that kind of thing. Again, no diagnoses. This is my interpretation of how the character is written. But because of this, Holly's mother has convinced herself that Holly is not capable of living on her own, which she absolutely is. And when she finally breaks free of that, she's able to create a career for herself and use her skills and her strengths that she has in her favor to do this work and to push through her own weaknesses. So this is not like a neurodivergent savant sort of story where because she is autistic, she's some sort of master detective, but rather there's some things she's really good at because her brain works a certain way, and other parts of the way her brain works get in her way. And I think it's a pretty realistic view of any kind of neurodivergence, whether it's autism or mental illness or something else, that there are aspects that can certainly help, but there are also aspects that hold you back, and pretending that one outweighs the other in either direction does the individual a disservice. So Holly has had to learn how to live with the way that her brain works differently from other people's. And she also has people working with her. So she's not by herself. That doesn't always stop her from getting herself into trouble. But then what a boring main character she would be if she never got into trouble. So Holly is grieving and takes on this case as a way to distract herself because of the many complicated emotions that she has of her mother dying, with so many things left unsaid and so much of their relationship in disrepair. And I think too that there's something about this mother who is so distraught at the loss of her daughter that appeals to Holly. But where the pandemic fits in is very interesting in that it is the part of the setting when Holly goes out and talks to people, when she interviews people, when she's investigating locations. She runs into people with different opinions. Some people say, oh, well, are you double vaxxed? Because I'm double vaxxed. If that's the case, I'm comfortable taking off my mask if you are. Whereas other people are like, why are you wearing a mask? It's not real. And so you have these different, and people all over the spectrum of ideas and beliefs, but people are very open about how they feel about things. And Holly stands by what she feels she needs to do to protect herself: wear a mask, get vaccines, wash her hands, all of that. But she does not get into arguments with people. She can't, because otherwise she can't do her job. And so that's that discomfort I know I have felt in the past interacting with people whose viewpoints are so different from mine, but it's either not worth it or not safe or counterproductive to get into an argument with that particular person. And I'm sure many of you have experienced that as well on all sorts of topics. And then we get to our villains. At the very beginning of the book, we see how one of the missing people has been kidnapped by this older couple who are pretending to need help. And I don't want to delve too much into those characters because then I'm getting into spoiler territory, which I try to avoid. But I will say that a lot of their motivation is related to health and the way that they interpret scientific and medical discussions. While what they are doing is not specific to COVID, it does definitely run in a really strong parallel that that I think was quite well done. I will give as a content warning, because I didn't know this going in, that there is cannibalism in this book, which is a topic I tend to avoid, to be perfectly honest. And when it first came up in the book, I had to pause and think to myself and decide for myself whether I wanted to continue with it. Not because the book isn't good, but because just that's a challenging topic for me. There's a huge difference between early Stephen King novels that he published in the 80s and 90s and his more recent novels like Holly, like The Outsider is one as well, where, and this one has some big content warnings as well. By the way, just violence against children. The way that he handles those topics now is very different from the way that he would have handled them, I think, decades ago, which I think shows not only his growth as a writer, but also I think growth as a person as well. If I may say so, do your own research if that is a challenging topic for you. The way that he talks about it, and also what he chooses to describe and what he chooses not to describe, I think is very different from a lot of that kind of literature that I've read in the past. And I really did appreciate it because it allowed me, as someone who doesn't like reading about that sort of thing, to read and enjoy this book. And I really did enjoy this book. I thought it was very well done. Another theme throughout this book is this idea of caretaking, particularly maternal caretaking, as Holly is reflecting on her mother, on her life with her mother because her mother has just died. And also because there's a little surprise in her mother's will that she was not expecting. That her mother loved her, Holly still has no doubt. But love isn't always support. Sometimes love is taking the supports away. And what a good line there, that this concept of someone being abusive doesn't mean they don't care about you. That actually her mother is pulling her in, and that doesn't make it okay at all. And Holly's not walking away thinking, oh, everything's fine because I know my mother loved me, but rather the way that she loved her is toxic. And the professors, Harris, have a similar sort of approach, not only in the way that they draw people in, but also in their relationship with each other. And if you set aside the kidnapping and murdering people, they have a very loving relationship with one another, and they do care for each other, and they do seem like the sort of couple that one would aspire to be. Again, minus the kidnapping and murder and stuff. That's not great. But they do look after each other. And Emily has this way of pulling in, especially their female victims, pulling them in and making them feel safe or cared for before the axe falls, as it were. There's also, for contrast, a very positive pseudo-maternal relationship between Barbara, who works for Holly and is an aspiring poet, and an elderly published poet named Olivia, who is mentoring her. And that is a subplot that explains a few things. It explains why Barbara is a bit separate from what Holly is doing, but it also shows that not all of those relationships have to be negative. That King is not presenting Holly's mother and Emily Harris as the only blueprint for what that relationship can be like, whether it's a relative or, in this case, a friend. And I really enjoyed that storyline quite a bit. And it kept connecting a little bit to the main storyline here and there, to the point at which one worries for Barbara. But I really enjoyed this book, and I think it's one of his better ones, to be perfectly honest, of the ones that I've read. Have you read Holly or anything else about Holly Gibney in Stephen King's work? If so, let me know what you think, or any other thoughts that you have in the comments. And no matter what, keep reading.